because
No,
that is
wait. Yeah, HL quantum, HL
so
quantum.
in quantum you're talking about chapter 12, right? Quantum and nuclear physics.
Yes.
What is it? Is it 485 should be.
Yeah, 485.
It's not. It's selecting the number instead of letting me type in.
You wrote 185. Are you working on a tablet?
No, I actually got the working on the laptop itself, but that the pen tablet is what you're looking at. That selection was due to the pen tablet. Okay. First things first. Oh wow, they begin with the very most interesting topic, photoelectric effect. Do you know what photoelectric effect is? In the most primitive sense, what is it?
In the most primitive sense, it's lights property to act to transfer electrical energy.
So essentially, it's a game of carom. Think of it as a
Yeah,
game
like
of.
it can pop off electrons from a negatively charged plate if you have a light that is at a frequency higher than at UV or higher than UV.
Yeah. I'll show that as well, and I'll discuss that in detail. Just a minute. Where did it go? Faraday's lamp.
Just want to rush through the first two parts because photoelectric effect, the de Broglie double slit experiment, those two I did in class today. And
Okay.
nobody else said anything. Like physics actually was a very small class, just a class of 4 people with sir. Everybody else was just quiet, so it was like me having a tuition with my school teacher.
I get the idea. Okay. Uh, yeah. Here we are. Now, what we do is you have a plate, charged plate, and intensity I'll go to 100%. Bouncing of electrons, game of current. A photon comes in, strikes an electron, loosens it, the electron gains energy from the photon's collision, voila, it moves away. That's how it works, right? I
Can
can
I
change,
increase the frequency?
yeah, I can change the wavelength here. I cannot control frequency in this particular experiment. I can control the intensity and the wavelength.
Okay, wavelength. So
Yeah.
higher.
Depending on the material, your wavelength can change. The requirement of the material can change. So in zinc, in the current wavelength, it's not emitting. On the lower wavelengths, it's emitting. It depends how much. Simple as that. Explanation is also pretty straightforward. Whenever the photon hits above the threshold frequency, work is done. That work is transferred to the electron, and the electron emits from the
Yeah,
plate.
electron jumps out. As long as there is energy that is surpasses a threshold, which is H.
Correct. This is the quantum model of explanation. So they hit at a certain wavelength. As they collide, they lose all their energy. So they stay there or they bounce off at zero energy. What happens is they switch that energy to an electron, which then moves out of its orbit. That is the threshold frequency, the frequency that is required in order to plug that electron out of its orbital. Depending on the material, the energy for the orbital can change because the material changes the number of the orbital which it is in, hence so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Photoelectric effect formula Emax is equal to HF minus uh, 5, it's called. This symbol
What?
is called phi, PHI. This symbol
Pi.
right.
Pi.
Not phi, it's phi.
Pi. Pi.
Yeah, you're
Pi.
gonna speak Chinese now.
Not phi. Is pi. Not phi. Pi.
As you say so. Now,
Hi.
essentially, Emax is the energy required, maximum energy. H is the Planck's constant, F is the frequency, and phi is the threshold frequency. Yeah, nothing
So
new
in
here.
this, if I can reiterate that the threshold frequency will be the max the
Minimum,
max constant times frequency minus maximum energy given.
minimum energy required, threshold frequency, threshold energy rather. Phi is the work function of the metal.
Work function. What is that?
Essentially, an understanding of how much energy is required to pluck out one electron. Minimum amount of energy required to remove one electron from that particular material.
Okay, understood. So then
So
what
for
does Planck's constant do?
Planck's constant gives us the idea. It's a multiplicity constant for photons. Whenever you will talk about photons or anything related to photons, Planck's constant will be like I'm here. It will anyhow come into the equation. There's no way you can move away from it or hide it somewhere. फर्क नहीं पड़ता. It will come there. जहाँ पे भी फोटोन की बात होगी, लाइट की बात होगी, वहां पे घुस ही जाता है ये. It's a messy thing. It likes coming into equations.
Hmm.
All these calculations are based on it, so I'm not gonna go in depth with these. It's just gonna consume my time. Millikan's experiment, the simulation is based on this. Millikan's experiment. You see, the setup is pretty much identical.
Yeah, so there two charge plates, the light causes the electrons to bounce from one side, so it gets attracted to the positively charged plate,
Yes.
the
And
anode.
graph right here, this y is equal to mx plus c graph. It's this graph right here. The third graph, electron energy versus light frequency. This graph right here.
Energy versus light frequency. Okay.
Now wave theory and photoelectric effect. Ah, wave particle duality. Yay! So what is wave particle duality? Wave particle duality is light is a particle and a wave. Photoelectric effect is an
Yes.
phenomenon of particles, whereas light has wavelength, frequency. So double slit, experiment, diffraction, interference, all those are properties of waves. So light behaves like both as a wave and as a particle. So it's a wave particle duality. साइंटिस्ट हो गए पागल, सब लड़ने लगे, एक दूसरे का खून करने लगे.
Lambda is equal to Planck's constant divided by something.
हाँ जी, that is the wave understanding. Yeah, lambda is
Yeah.
equal to constant by p और
Momentum.
momentum of the particle. ये डी ब्रॉगल्स हाइपोथेसिस पे भी आता है एंड किसका था, अनसर्टेनिटी, हाइजेनबर्ग्स प्रिंसिपल ऑफ अनसर्टेनिटी. डी ब्रॉगल्स हाइपोथेसिस बोलता है कि एक पार्टिकल ये है ना, आई गिव यू दैट चैनल इंफोटेनमेंट चैनल वेरिटासियम, रिमेंबर in the
What?
first set, I told you about a YouTube channel called Veritasium. Remember?
Yeah.
Huh. There's a video over there. Okay. I'll not open up the video now because the video is essentially a 40-minute video. But to summarize it, it very nicely explains what I'm about to say. Wave particle duality gives us an idea that your particle is both a wave, sorry, your light is both a wave and a particle. Pay close attention, stop cleaning the calculator.
Okay, sir. Sorry.
Now, the wave particle duality suggests because it is a wave, you cannot know its momentum. You can know its direction, but it's a particle, so you should know its momentum, but not its direction. So, if you were to, this is also related to quantum entanglement, quantum tunneling. If you were to know the momentum of a certain particle, which is essentially the velocity it has, because the mass we already know. If you know the velocity, you cannot know its position because then its position will bounce off everywhere in the observable universe. That is what the uncertainty principle suggests. And de Broglie's hypothesis discusses this concept. So Heisenberg's uncertainty principle comes first. If you know the velocity, you do not know the direction. If you know the direction, you do not know the velocity. You cannot know the position x, y, and z of an elementary particle, or you cannot know the velocity. You can only know one of two. When you observe it, when you physically observe it, like if I take this particle and I observe it, I know its position. So now it can bounce off, entangle anywhere in the observable universe because I identified its position. But if I know its velocity, where it's going, I do not know where it's going. If I know how fast it's going, I do not know where it's going. I can just see it whoosh around in front of me, but I cannot identify what happened. Where is it? Where was it? Where it will be? I cannot answer these
So our
questions.
observation is causing change, or it is changing so much that our observation is not able to keep up.
Actually, the quantum model suggests that when we observe that particle, we cause that phenomena. Until we are not observing it, both are constant. This
So
is
how is our observation changing it? Is the light particles bouncing off of it and coming into our eyes or whatever that we're detecting, or is it some sort of magic brain waves?
the quantum entanglement theory or quantum theory suggests that the subatomic particle does not like being observed directly. First and first, I discussed this previously, you cannot directly observe an elementary particle. If you were to observe it, you wouldn't know both. This is de Broglie's hypothesis. This leads to Heisenberg's uncertainty. Sorry, this is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This leads to de Broglie's hypothesis and further identifies a wave cannot have momentum because it's uniform, so it does not need a momentum per se, right? And a
What?
wave does not has mass. If it does not has mass, that means it should not have momentum. But I know my body has a mass, so I should consider it a particle, but it's showing wave phenomena. De Broglie's hypothesis, wave
Wait, wait,
particle
wait,
duality.
wait, wait. Could you go back a second? Why can't it have momentum?
Do waves have a mass? Tell me this.
No.
If waves do not have a mass, momentum is equals to mass into velocity. If mass is zero, momentum becomes.
Zero.
So you either identify the particle, your sub-elementary object or quanta as a particle or a wave. If you know the momentum, you're identifying it physically as a particle. So you cannot know the direction, which is a wave phenomena. The velocity is tied up to a wave phenomena. If you know the position, so you're identifying it as a wave, you cannot know the particle concept, which is moment. This is de Broglie's hypothesis. It is also known as wave-particle duality. Later, it was identified as the electron diffraction experiment. It's very closely related to the interference diffraction. Okay, the only difference is in this we are using an electron to create the diffraction instead of physical light. The crystal emits electrons, and you can see the diffraction pattern in the several of those actually.
What is that double de Broglie double slit is this?
It's not here right now. It's
Wait,
only
what is this?
yeah.
Electron. Scroll down.
Yeah, yeah.
Electron diffraction.
Okay. We did light diffraction, right? Interference
Hmm.
diffraction, double slit experiment. Instead of using a photon, when you use an electron, it's called an electron diffraction. That's it.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, it's the same phenomena that electrons, the accumulation of their density changes, and you get bands of sorts, and those light and dark bands are the diffraction pattern. The diffraction pattern is the same for all. It's just that what particle you use gives you different diffraction patterns. So electron diffraction is when you're using an electron. And an electron volt is equal to half mv square, the mass and velocity of an electron. Presuming that m into v, they're just changing, applying momentum into the concept and giving you different formulations for the same. Why isn't it writing? Yeah. All these formulations are based on the same thing. P is equal to, yeah, P is equal to mv, P, P square is equal to mv square, m square v square. Using these two identities, they just apply it into half mv square and start solving. They go, चलो हम p के हिसाब से भी निकालेंगे, हम lambda के हिसाब से भी निकालेंगे, like that. It's nothing new. The current atomic model is based on Bohr's atomic model. Okay, it's named Bohr's atomic model. Although there are, okay, this is the most recent one, I'll call it, because right now we're following the quantum model. We're not following Bohr models anymore. बहुत कुछ लग रहा है. Now Bohr's model discusses atoms in 3D. Okay, that's why it is the most recent one I would call, but it's not the correct one. Its assumptions are the electron exists in stationary states. Okay, if they're not moving around, they're stationary until unless energy interacts with them, so on and so forth. Because like de Broglie's hypothesis, you cannot know the position and momentum of an elementary particle, so he presumed that the electron must be stationary. Second, electrons may move from one stationary state to another by absorbing or emitting radiation, quantum of an electromagnetic radiation, and delta E is equal to hf. The angular momentum of an electron in a stationary state is integral value of h of 2 pi. So what is the momentum?
Angular momentum. Is it talking about the spinning of the electron?
Yes.
Okay. So an electron spins and it has its own domain. And that domain becomes its electromagnetic field or magnetic field or whatever. So the angular momentum is calculating its spinning in a stationary state. So when it's not moving and it's just spinning, what will be the angular momentum? Okay, got it.
Because his assumption is based on the concept that the electron is stationary. So he applied that concept here. It's an integral multiple of h by 2 pi. That he further deviated by lambda is equal to h upon p, p is equal to mv, h by p. He integrated it further to give you this value. And what it essentially gives you an idea of how much energy you could play the carom with in order to push it further. And this is how it looks like. It's very similar to our current understanding, but instead of having these curved lines, we have a shaded region. This is the approximation कि इलेक्ट्रॉन यहाँ पे कहीं पे है, मुझे पता नहीं कहाँ है, but यहाँ पे कहीं पे जरूर है. This is our approximation. This is our understanding of an atom.
So a hydrogen atom is the only one that has a spherical electron. What do you call it? Possibility density?
Okay. Electrons.
Potential density, yeah.
No. Even I forgot.
It's delta P. What does P stand for over here?
Delta P, where is it?
No, in today's HL class we did.
Oh, yeah, it's called the probable density. Or
Yes,
the
probability density. Probability density.
not probability, it's probable density.
Probable
Probable
density.
yeah.
Okay. What's the difference between probability density and probable density?
Probability is the entire concept. Probable is a verb which is used to identify that this could be the potential area or potential volume around which, or potential group of positions, because we are talking in 3 dimensions. So potential group of positions around which your electron could exist. Because again, de Broglie's hypothesis, blah blah blah, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, blah blah blah. Now, the orbital and electron is generally referred to as its principal quantum number. There are 4 quantum numbers. I told you this about in magnetism yesterday's session, right? I talked about the 4th quantum number, which was spin. Other than that, there are 3 more, right? The first one is principal quantum number. This principal quantum number is essentially the orbital in which the electron exists, and you can use that to identify how much energy will be there in the electron if it's in that orbital. So if it's in first orbital, it will be 13.6 divided by n square, n will be 1, so it will be 13.6 divided by 2, 3.040 minus 1.51 minus 0.85, then 0 and positive value. Understood? Yes, no?
went over my head.
Which
Little.
part? Which part? Which part? Which part? Which
The
part you didn't?
the two other quantum things. One was spin.
Uh,
What were the other two were, yeah.
These are the four fundamental quantum numbers they are referred to. Here we are, previously we have talked about S, it's spin. We haven't talked about the other three. Here we are using the first quantum number, principal quantum number. It is the orbital in which the actual electron is present. So for example, electron in the hydrogen atom is present in the first orbital, right? So its energy which it has will be negative 13.6 electron volt because it's being attracted. As you move further away from the
From the
nucleus,
nucleus.
your energy increases. So you went from 13.6 in the first orbital to astonishing 3.4 in the second orbital. It's a negative, so energy is increasing. Okay,
So,
we'll study about this all four quantum numbers and how they work in the HL class. But right now, just this is the quantum number. That's it.
sir, how do we put a singular electron through double slit diffraction? Because isn't an electron already the smallest part of an atom?
You can kick an electron out of the atom, then it's an isolated electron, and then you can do whatever
Yeah,
you
but
want
the
with it.
electron will be this tiny. The double slit through which it has to go will be this huge. An electron would just pass through it.
Give me a moment. Give me a moment. I'm gonna show you the actual diffraction experiment of the electron. I'm gonna show you how it looks. I
Yes,
have
sir.
a video
Prove to
of
me
that.
it is real. Prove to me how it is possible to diffract and subatomic particle that's already considered the smallest amongst the three main ones.
Wait, I have to look for it.
No, it's
Q&A.
7:14. Why are you ringing?
I was like, hi, hello, I'm still here. Hello, look at me. It was reminding you that.
Let's set it to 8 o'clock, but it rung now. I'm curious. Schrodinger's wave function. The concept of probability was developed into the quantum mechanical model of the atom in 1929 by the Austrian and later Austrian Irish physicist Erwin Schrödinger. Schrodinger's wave function, whatever that is, describes the
Okay.
quantum state of particles. This wave equation has many similarities to a classical wave equation, but it
Okay.
is not a derived
Tell you,
equation.
but I can't find it right now. I'll have to view every video based on light in order to find it. It's based on it's in the video where they discuss diffraction, and in that it's actually showing the microscopic image of how the electron vibrates and either moves through either of the slits. It's shown, but I can't find it. Really want to show right now. Now, for now, I'll just move on ahead with this. But let's discuss Schrodinger's wave function. I'll read what Schrodinger's wave function is. Schrodinger's wave function describes the quantum state of particles. His wave function has many similarities to classic wave equation, but is not an derived equation. It has, however, been verified experimentally, and its solution for single electron agrees with Bohr's relationship. The wave function is not directly observable quantity, but its amplitude is very significant. With light waves, we observe intensity, not the amplitude. We have seen the intensity proportional to the square of the amplitude. For the wave function, the amplitude is maximum greatest probability of finding the electron, blah, 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 blah. Where is the important part? Yeah. The square of the amplitude of the wave function is directly proportional to the probability per unit volume of finding the particle. This is known as the probability density. Mathematically, it is written as so and so. This is the most important part. वेव फंक्शन क्या बोलता है पता है कि हम लाइट को जो देखते हैं वी ऑब्जर्व इट इन टर्म्स ऑफ इंटेंसिटी वी डू नॉट ऑब्जर्व इट्स एम्पलीट्यूड because it's a wave you cannot find the amplitude blah 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 you cannot observe it that's it but we know that the amplitude affects the intensity the square of the amplitude is what you get as intensity his wave function discusses the quantum phenomena quantum behavior of any wave particle okay wave particle duality and it aligned with Niels Bohr's observation as well his wave function, the amplitude of that wave function gives us the probable density of finding that quantum particle in the three-dimensional space-time structure. मतलब मेरे को पता चल सकता है I can find the position of a particle by using his equation. His wave equation looks simple, but isn't. समझा नहीं समझा बाउंसर गया
I understood. We used to initially just measure the intensity in light waves, not the amplitude. The square of the amplitude is directly proportional to the intensity.
Other than that, you understood nothing.
So momentum is equal to the amplitude squared delta v, whatever v is. I think v speed.
Momentum. Okay, first things first, P is not momentum. P is the probability of finding that subatomic particle in that region. And P is volume being considered.
Okay. So intensity, but now you're replacing intensity with amplitude squared. So amplitude squared into volume considered is equal to probability. Okay, so the more the volume, higher the probability. And more the intensity or more the amplitude, higher the probability.
Done.
How does amplitude? Oh wait, it is both a wave and a particle. So while it may not be a property of a particle, this property is derived from a wave.
Voila. Well done.
So I think by not thinking.
Oh, well done, well done, well done. Now, Copenhagen's interpretation of this is very interesting. So listen to this interpretation. कान खोल के दिमाग खोल के सुनो बहुत मजा आएगा. For a double slit interference pattern, in terms of probability wave, the wave function is considered to be such that the single photon or electron passes through both the slits and everywhere on the scene until it's observed or measured. I'll read it again just to put it in your brain's hard drive right now. For the double slit interference pattern, in terms of the probability wave, the wave function is considered to be such that a single photon or electron passes through both slits and is everywhere on the screen. Evenly, by that we mean until it is observed or measured. So if you weren't looking at the screen, it is evenly spread on the screen. Once you look at the screen, you get the interference pattern. When this happens, the wave function collapses to the classical case and the particle is detected. This is known as Copenhagen's interpretation.
This is the same as that cat in the box thing. As long as you are unable to observe the cat is both dead and alive. It's both existent and non-existent.
That is the key statement in quantum mechanics to make it understand to the layman how quantum mechanics work. It doesn't work.
Is that cat Copenhagen's cat or Schrodinger's cat?
I'll explain what happened. First, let's go through here. When this happened, it collapses. This is known as Copenhagen's interpretation, uh, shown by name by the German physicist Werner Heisenberg, also Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It relates to the interpretation of quantum mechanics used by Heisenberg, Bohr, and their co-workers between 1924 and 1927. It can be summarized as such. Nothing is real until it is observed. So behind you, there might be a void of space, but we will not float till you observe it. And at the moment you observe it, that void disappears. That is what this statement essentially means. So matter or light can be considered a wave or a particle. If it behaves in the particle, then it is a particle. If it behaves like a wave, then it's a wave because you're observing it in that format. You observing it changes the characteristic of that body. Oh, I love this. People tend to go high brain temperatures over this. I know I went. I was trying to understand this and I literally brain freeze myself thinking, how does this work? How can observing system change its function?
My interpretation of this is that if you observe something as a wave, you'll think of it as a wave, meaning all of your results you'll observe with the interpretation and the mindset of a wave. Thus, it is a wave. But if it's a particle, when you're looking at it, you will find results that are of it that show it as a particle, and you will be able to calculate things as a particle because for you it is a particle.
So I'll reframe your statement. Your statement is correct, but let's reframe it. If you observe its wave phenomena, for you it will act as a wave, it will give results as a wave, and you'll prove it's a wave. But if you observe its particle phenomena, it will behave as a wave for you, it will give you particle results, and you will be able to prove that it's particle. So it will dance on your terms. That is what it means. The way you observe it is what you get. That is what we always say in quantum mechanics. You cannot observe it directly.
Because humans will always have some innate instinctual bias that can never ever be 100% removed. As soon as we look at the data, the bias will already be created.
And it also, see, the Copenhagen's interpretation is actually very nice because it discusses even if there was no bias, an observer's interference in the system changes its function. We presume that in the interference pattern, there is actually no interference pattern until an observer observes, and then the function of the entire system drops to the classical mechanics and you get an interference. But how the hell did it happen? We presume that there is no interference because nobody was observing it. Schrodinger's cat. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle I already discussed, so I'm not going to discuss it. It's a very same thing. Pair production and annihilation. Yay! Yay!
Annihilating waves.
Oh, it's not annihilating waves, not by a long shot. It's pair production and what happens? Okay.
Are those turbulent flow swirls?
Okay. No, not by a long shot. Okay, first I'll minimize this, otherwise you'll keep getting confused by the diagram. First things first. Remember I told you that gamma is pure energy.
Yeah.
Let's presume that somehow I am able to produce matter using gamma, because we know E is equal to mc squared. So if I have energy, I can convert it into mass using speed of light equation. Special theory of relativity. E is equal to mc squared, just a part of it. There's a long short equation behind it. But that being said, now if I were to convert that particle energy into particle now, that energy would equally produce a pair, a positron and an electron. Every particle will have its opposite particle, a positron. I repeat, it's a positron, not a proton. A proton has a uh, elementary bias towards it. I cannot remember the elementary particle, but just as an electron has a positron, there's a proton and an antiproton, neutron, and an anti-neutron. So these are the pair productions as we refer to. So whenever you convert energy into particle, you would get a pair. You wouldn't get one particle, you would get a pair. Fun fact. Let's get theoretical here. If everything was produced in pairs, why is there more matter than antimatter? Burn your brain a bit, I'll wait.
Whenever antimatter and matter meet, they annihilate each other, cancel each other out, turn into pure energy. So in areas of high concentration of matter, there'll be a very low concentration or no concentration of antimatter. But wherever there is a high concentration of antimatter, there will be a low or no concentration of matter. So in our observable area, there's a high concentration of matter, meaning all the antimatter is somewhere else.
No, your entire explanation is biased because you presume that there are high densities and low densities. But we just discussed that particles are produced in pair and they're produced at the same event. So how can there be high densities and low densities? We know that by the principle of diffusion, everything diffuses in empty space evenly. It evenly. So how can we have high densities and low densities here? It's not like the particles are inherently different. The mass, velocity, everything is same except for the charge.
Maybe they're holed up somewhere in black holes.
No. Everywhere we look in the universe, we only find matter. Our understanding of the observable universe is pretty large, okay? Just to be clear, it's pretty large.
It's pretty small.
Yeah, fine, pretty small because infinity is still a big number. Yeah. Still, we can't find antimatter. If it is pair production theory is correct, which we know it's correct because we have done it in the LHC, okay, and we have
It's
found
produced antimatter in the giant particle accelerator.
yes, we have reduced it as well. So we know it exists. And we know the pair production theory is correct because when they collided, their energy divided into pairs. Then how come it's not working here? How come if pair production theory is correct and when these positron and electron will meet, they annihilate each other, then from where the hell did we get so much matter? If antimatter is the equal and opposite to matter, where is it? Why is it? And how come it's not annihilating us at this point in time? Think about it. I'll give you the year to think about it. You won't still answer. Okay, this is the Feynman's diagram. Remember Feynman? I told you about the physics teacher who made physics interesting. This is Feynman's diagram of pair production. That with time, gamma radiation will decay into particles. This is Feynman's understanding of pair production. Observe, he's showing timer flowing in one direction only because he also presumed that law of equality doesn't hold true when you're talking about quantum scales, like I always discuss. If pair law of equality here. Gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. You're just gonna lose all your hair. You're gonna go crazy. You're gonna be surrounded in a lab with equipment, and you're gonna be like, I still can't find the answer to the first question. Okay, don't worry. The entire this paragraph discusses the gamma radiation decaying into a positron and an electron, which evenly produces, if you have the gamma radiation of 1.02 mega electron volts, so electron will have each electron and positron will have so and so energy. Okay, and when these particles were to meet each other, they annihilate each other and give back the original energy. But in this process, this annihilation and all, you need to add into the account that we do not know the actual position of the positron or the electron. That becomes a problem for us, because if you
So,
do not, yeah,
is it possible that the reason why antimatter has not reached us is because the universe is just so freaking large and that it has not diffused everywhere properly? And plus, for matter, when matter gathers together, it creates a larger mass of matter. Meaning, and then there's gravity, meaning more matter gets attracted together. Same could be for antimatter. Antimatter have mass, more antimatter come together, they have greater mass, greater gravity, and they all start to get attracted to each other.
वेरी नाइस अंडरस्टैंडिंग, बहुत है, अच्छा लगा हमें हमें सुन के बहुत अच्छा लगा. बट देयर इज वन प्रॉब्लम. एट द बिग बैंग मैटर एंड एंटी मैटर वर प्रोड्यूस्ड इवनली.
But the Big Bang shot everything everywhere, and then let's say we shot everything everywhere. 90% of matter and antimatter just boom and cancel themselves out in the first nanosecond.
You're telling me I am observing the 10% of matter around me. 10% of matter. And I can't even find a single minuscule particle of antimatter. You're telling me that?
There does
Just
exist antimatter. We've observed antimatter in space. They exist in those extremely energized clouds and voids where matter and antimatter exist and they collide, turn into energy. Energy turns into matter, antimatter collide.
okay. The
Energy
theory,
and matter,
some
antimatter collide. Energy.
the theoretical assumption that in the CMB there are blank spots which have almost no background radiation, and you're telling me that is where antimatter is in high density.
No,
There is collide.
not in those voids. I'm talking about those turbulent clouds.
No, it is filled with matter. We have observed them. You know
Yes, it's
that.
filled with matter and antimatter. One of those that have a high amount of charge changing. That's because matter and antimatter collide. They turn into energy. That energy then later, after some time, turns into matter and antimatter, and then changes again and again inside that cloud.
You're confusing yourself. It only constitutes of matter, and the energy subsequently provided is because the mass of the gases is essentially pressing onto the cloud, the nebula, creating stars. And when a star is created, its gravitational potential energy pushes the nebula away. And that is how solar system arises from a nebula.
Not talking about a nebula. I forgot the term for it. It's not exactly a cloud. It's not a cloud. It's not a void. It's not like some, I can't exactly describe. It's like a hotspot of energy. Yeah, that's the best way I can describe it. It's a hotspot of energy in which energy is continuously turning into matter and antimatter, which continuously destroy each other and turn into energy again.
Okay, we'll leave that discussion for some other day, and I'll discuss this pair production and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. What I suggest is that electron and positron, since we cannot identify them, we cannot certainly say that they will produce that much amount of energy. We can only estimate. That is the whole idea of quantum mechanics behind the uncertainty principle. Okay.
Hmm.
Now the next is my favorite topic, quantum tunneling.
I'm ready.
Wait.
He's not talking to you, Google. You can sleep. good Google.
I'm finding that video about quantum tunneling with love. Why is it that the favorite videos I want aren't found right now? Okay, this is not it either. Okay. I'll have to discuss it more simply than I would have. Quantum tunneling simply suggests that particles have a range of energy, right? Not just one point of energy, but a range of energy. So, in that range, there might be a possibility that due to its energy, it might cross a physical barrier. Depending on the barrier and depending on its energy, it is a small probability of finding my quantum particle on the other end of the barrier. It's based on probability, okay? So,
But isn't the thing just so small that it would be able to go through and there won't be any proper barrier for it in the first place?
so where did the idea of quantum tunneling come from? It came from the idea of the sun and its fusion process. Now, in order to fuse the nucleus, it needs to overcome the opposition of the electrons, right? And we know the gravitational potential it forces over its core is still not enough for a continuous fusion. So, what is happening? The nucleus is quantum tunneling into the other nucleus based on the range of energy it can possess. So it's basically a hit or miss over the nucleus. That's it. That's what it is doing. It is tunneling through and fuses.
Just traveling through space into another nucleus, and because the two nucleuses overlap, they fuse. Is that what you're saying?
I'll read the statement, it will make it easier for you. Quantum tunneling is responsible for relatively low temperature fusion that occurs in main sequence stars as the sun, our sun. The repulsive forces between the protons that are to fuse require kinetic energies over 1 mega electron volt at a temperature of 10 raised to 10 Kelvin. It is much higher than the core of the sun. We know this because the core of the sun is 3 into 10 raised to 7 Kelvin. So it's 10 to the power of 3 less. As the result of the high pressures and quantum tunneling, there is a small chance that the hydrogen atoms can fuse at temperatures below than expected. This is because of the immense number of atoms, so probability greater the number, more the chances. Second, even with very low probability of quantum tunneling fusion occurring, there's a great deal going on. In case of the sun, there's estimated in excess of 4 million tons of hydrogen fusing in this way every second.
Okay, so over here, using quantum tunneling, like at a point of its probability and its amount, the amount of energy it has, it's skipping the electrons repelling each other. So the electrons are repelling each other, but in one of those possibilities, it is just completely of its being positioned or moving. It's just completely skipping that barrier and coming right up next to this nucleus, and then those two fuse.
Also, it is overcoming the proton-proton potential. So our understanding is quantum tunneling. Okay, this would be a wrong explanation, but I'm putting it as simply as I can. It's a hole in space. Remember those Star Trek movies where they go through a wormhole?
Mm.
Quantum tunneling essentially suggests that the sub-elementary particles are wormholed. So passing through a wormhole, tunneling through and meeting on the other side.
Okay.
That creating a hole in fabric of space and time, and instantaneously coming back up.
All of this is happening in nanoseconds.
I talk about instantaneously. If you were to take even femtoseconds, that would be still greater than the quantity I'm discussing.
Okay, so
Instant.
zero time. Time is zero. Nada.
Yeah. Quantum tunneling happens, it's like this, then all of a sudden it's here. It cut through the fabric of space and time. So traveling through a wormhole, traveling great distances, even actually without traveling them. The concept of, okay, many people have done this. I'm just using their idea here. This is nothing new. Take a piece of paper. This is space-time, fabric of space-time. This is my diary. It's very precious. I'll use something that is not so precious.
Let me just take a scrap paper lying around here.
Got it.
Okay, so I have this.
Fabric of space-time. This is my fabric of space-time. I'll remove the background so that you can see it much more clearly. And I'll also stop screen sharing for the moment so that you can understand. Now this is my space-time fabric. It's this piece of paper. Now usually if I have to travel from this point to this point, what do? I go across the space-time fabric, which consumes time. A wormhole, or the concept of quantum tunneling, which gives the rise to the idea of wormhole, suggests that I'm bending space-time and creating a hole between my final and initial position. So this is my hole. You seeing this pencil? It went through. So for everyone else who's stationary in this space-time, they are observing me going, thinking that I instantaneously disappeared from point A and appeared at point B. But what I actually did was I quantum tunneled through the space-time fabric by bending it. Because the particles have so little to no mass. We know that electrons are so little to no mass. Even atoms do not have that big amount of mass. Hydrogen is the lightest element known to man. It can quantum tunnel with relatively no energy. And by that I mean relatively low energy. It still requires a whole lot of energy. That is why the temperature is so high and the pressures are so high. But still it's relatively low. Compared to if I were to quantum tunnel you, I would need infinite energy. That's the concept.
So the amount of energy required to transport a human through quantum tunneling is so great. It is incalculable. It's inconceivable by the human mind.
We know, we have conceived it, we have calculated it, but to put it simply, it's impossible. With our technological advancement, with us being a type 3 civilization, right now, it's impossible for us.
Type 3 civilization?
Civilizations are rated, if you didn't know that. Every civilization, we presume that in our understanding of the universe, we are not advanced enough to identify other intelligent organisms. Yeah, it's this. It's called Cardiff scale. I cannot even pronounce it properly, but it essentially discusses civilizations as what they are, depending upon their technological advancement. I was wrong, we are type 1. I apologize. We are type 1. We are a planetary civilization who can use and store all energy available on the planet. We are, by a long shot, a planetary organization, civilization. A type 2 is a stellar, which can control the energy of the planetary system. So every inch of energy, every newton of energy in the system. Type 3 galactic, which can control the energy of the entire host galaxy. There are two extended categories, type 4 and type 5. Because we cannot identify human civilization, so we presume that these are the kinds of civilizations that are there out there. Blah 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 blah. You can Google it up, you can read it up, you can do videos about it. There's
How
several
do you
things.
even communicate across a galaxy? Because even light takes millions of years. Would you have to quantum tunnel through it?
That is what it is suggesting, right? We are not advanced enough to understand this.
Okay, so humans are just too dumb.
Well done. That is the main outcome. Now, quantum tunneling is currently used in several things. We know quantum computers use quantum tunneling. We also use quantum tunneling in quantum tunneling composites, which are a basis for touchscreen technologies right now.
What?
Cryptography, photon teleportation.
Wait. What did you say?
Read it, I'll mark it for you.
Where is it? Page number.
I'm not sharing the screen, I'm so sorry.
I need to read this. How is it connected to that screen?
Can you mark that?
510. Yo! Quantum quantum tunneling composites are basis of touchscreen technology. Quantum tunneling technologies applications smartphone.
Happy realizing.
How far has humanity gotten?
Pretty far, but we are still type 1. Now get the idea of what type 2 be. Type 2 would be.
Wouldn't it take us like around 1 trillion years to get to type 2?
It's presumed that we might essentially become extinct before we even become a type 2.
Wait, what will happen? Solar flare?
Yeah,
Or
by the rate at which we are moving, it's very sure that we would be, our solar system would be eaten by our own sun before we become a type 2.
oh yeah, sun will transform into red giants.
Yeah,
We'll have to like put some gigantic thrusters on our Earth and use our own core as a fuel source, or put a Dyson sphere around our sun. But wait, how will we get enough material to build a Dyson sphere around a red giant?
Keep thinking about this post session. Okay, I won't answer any of these questions because I'd love to see your face once after a week. You've thought about all of this. How would you look? I want to see that old face that I had. I want to see that.
Are we done?
No, we are not even halfway through. We are beginning with 12.2 nuclear physics.
We finished the first quarter.
There are 4 parts or there are 2 parts?
I think 2 parts only.
Check.
In HL. Index. So yeah, only 2 parts. Interaction of matter with radiation and nuclear physics. Nuclear physics. Oh yeah, we are halfway done. Or we're just done with the introduction. Yes, we're just done with the introduction. There's so much more here.
Congratulations. Now let's user for scattering.
$7:51.
Oh, it's almost time now. Didn't even realize. Now, Rutherford scattering experiment gave us an idea that there is some empty space, but that also the nucleus is very dense and the electrons are also highly charged, all of that. We use that to identify the method of closest approach. मतलब कैसे हम easily nucleus को hit कर सकते हैं? Because we know that only 1 in 8,000 alpha particles were able to hit the nucleus. तो मैं probability कम कैसे करूँ? By calculations, by identifying कि मेरे को कहाँ पे hit कर, मुझे अगर जानना है कि the probability of hitting head on collision I need to know the position of closest approach. मतलब nucleus. Oh, around से. I need to know the position where the alpha particle needs to hit. That is known as the position of closest approach or maximum energy, as it is referred to.
So
Taking
is it
the
just trial and error or calculation?
it's calculation. We take into account the energy from radius around which there is highest probability of nucleus being present. We take the ZE constant, which is for the gold. E stands for the electron, so 2e of alpha particle charge, and K is the Coulomb's constant that gives me the energy with which I need to launch my electron in order to hit the nucleus.
Oh yeah, because electron is also acting as a wave. Its movement will be affected by the amount of energy given in it.
Yes.
Not just its speed, but also it's like how it will move. So with more energy, it can move like this.
Correct. Now, see, they have for an alpha particle, they are finding the most probable radius, and they found it to be 2.96 into 10 raised to minus 14 coulomb. Later on, we found out. Okay, I won't go through the entire mathematical explanation. I'll just explain this: the derivation approximation. So, gold nucleus being a point mass, we identify where it would be. Okay, but the Coulomb force is not applicable because we know that the strong nuclear force is dominant within the nucleus. So Rutherford went on to obtain a relation between alpha particles being scattered and the variety of angles they arrived at, and came to an arrangement that the nucleus is essentially this big, 3 into 10 raised to 14 for the gold. Okay, for the gold. And he then identified what is the highest charge alpha particles which were about to hit it, and the separation between the strong nuclear force becomes dominant, and it was able to penetrate the region of the strong nuclear force, overcome it, and hit the nucleus itself. Okay, as the volume V of the nucleus is directly proportional to the number of nucleons, V is directly proportional to A, and since there are volume is length cube, so area by A divided by 1 upon 3 gave us this. R is equal to R0 A by 1 upon 3. R0 is Fermi radius. Now this Fermi radius is very interesting because it also applies to the black holes.
In what?
Black holes. The Fermi radius relates to that concept of uh, how far can you be in order to essentially escape the gravitational pull of the black hole, that all of that, all of that. It has a different name because it was calculated by a different person and the derivation is a bit different, but the relation is very close. It just identifies what kind of radius you would have around the body in order to overcome it. Nuclear density gives us the idea of what is the density within the nucleus. So how much dominant the strong nuclear force is. I love this. मजा आएगा. This is the
Wait,
for it.
let me slow down for a little bit.
Okay. What happened? Where did you lose me?
I got.
Did you get the Fermi radius? What it is?
Nope.
Fermi radius is the region, three-dimensional region, the radius of three-dimensional region, where the strong nuclear force is dominant. Of the nucleus, the strong nuclear force is dominant. That is the Fermi
With
radius.
strong nuclear forces, that would mean the nucleus of an atom.
Yes. The nucleus of an atom is governed by the strong nuclear force, and the Fermi radius gives us an idea of where that strong nuclear force exists within the atom, at the center of the atom. So everything is based upon probability. That is why we need to estimate everything. We cannot identify anything, observe it physically. Get the idea?
So we just need to use probability and use it a lot to narrow down the possible places it could be.
And that is what the Fermi radius does for us. सो तो नहीं गए ना? हाँ जागे है, ठीक है. आज के लिए विल स्टॉप क्योंकि इससे ज़्यादा मैं लूँगा तो I'm pretty sure your brain will possibly freeze or fry, either is possible. और इसके बाद में न्यूक्लियर डेंसिटी करने लगा तो आई डिस्कस न्यूक्लियर स्टार all of that blah blah blah, so I won't start that right now. I'll just stop for today. Okay,
Just feel so sleepy all of a sudden.
chalo, now you can leave. पढ़ा
Good
ठीक
night.
है, डोंट स्लीप, चलो पढ़ाई करो.
Sir, I will do padai in